Hello and welcome to PETA LYRE&apos Rating Normal book event. If you have just joined me, I'm here with Anna Whateley, who is the author of this debut novel. But before we begin, I just want to acknowledge the traditional owners on whose land we are all meeting, wherever we might be virtually, and just acknowledge those elders past, present, and also emerging, and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are joining Anna and I also. I'm coming to you from Jagera and Yuggera country. And Anna, where are you tonight?
I'm on the Turrbal and Yagara lands. I think we overlap in certain ways because we're not very far from each other.
That's right, we do. I'm Rhianna Patrick, and if you have never heard me, I am on ABC Radio, and it is my absolute pleasure to do this book event for Anna for PETA LYRE&apos Rating Normal, her debut book, I should say. There it is. Oh, look at that blue.
It's so pretty.
And we didn't even practice that. But Anna, I'd also like to acknowledge that one of the partners for this event is Love Oz YA, who have partnered with Oz Authors Online, and also to acknowledge the ongoing work of Love Oz YA, and also encourage any of you, if you haven't yet, signed up to the newsletter, followed them on Twitter, followed them on Instagram, then go ahead and do that. Now, Anna, there will be a prize draw. Please tell us about the prizes.
There are multiple prizes. So we have one that you will draw from people who've asked questions online on Instagram and Twitter. And we also have my own prize for people who pre-ordered PETA LYRE&apos Rating Normal and needed toilet paper. So we will draw that one. They will also be getting a draft page of the first draft of the book with different titles and things from way back when.
That sounds like a prize not to be missed.
I don't know how often I'll share that because I actually haven't looked and it may be slightly embarrassing. That's okay. We're all family here.
Now, Anna, those that have joined us will have the chance to be able to ask their questions online. We do ask that you maybe save them up towards the end when I open the floor to questions. So if you have any and you don't want to forget them, then maybe write them down and then type away and send them to us because Anna is very keen to hear all of your questions. Now, Anna, the most obvious question and where to start, what is PETA LYRE&apos Rating Normal all about?
Yeah. Okay. So PETA LYRE&apos Rating Normal is about PETA LYRE, who is 16 years old. She is neurodivergent, so she is autistic and has ADHD and sensory processing disorder. And it's written in her own voice, so I share the diagnosis with her. And she gets everything right. She follows all the social rules, and then everything's going really well until she falls in love with a new girl and she goes on the school ski trip and things start to unravel because the rules don't make a lot of sense. And that's kind of where it all starts to unravel for her. Yeah.
And Anna, we aren't giving any spoilers tonight. We are saving that journey for you if you haven't yet read it to be able to take that journey. So some of the questioning might get a little ambiguous as we skirt around some of the things that happen, but bear with us on that because it'll all make sense after you read the book. But the thing that we come to know PETA by is this rating system that she has for herself and the ratings that she gives herself after every interaction. Why did you want to explore this with PETA? And, why did you want to use this device throughout the book as we read what PETA is going through?
It's such a funny thing because I don't really remember doing it as a conscious choice. It was a shortcut, possibly lazy of me, wanting to just communicate something really quickly and efficiently with how it feels when you get to the end of the day or you get to the end of an interaction with someone and you question yourself how well you've passed, and it's such an insidious thing and you don't realize you're doing it, but sometimes you'll come away from a conversation and think, oh no, I totally stuffed that one, or you've slowly processed, because often we're slow processors, and you think, oh no, they meant this, or uh-oh, that was a joke and I didn't laugh, and you think, okay, well that was a 5 out of 10, and so that sort of became a shorthand for me to communicate how PETA LYRE was feeling at the end of the day or at the end of something that had happened, to just express what that and also how good it feels if you feel like you've passed, and it's this awful moment where you think, oh yay, oh no, that's terrible. Because even for myself, I'll think, oh yay, I look so normal. Oh, hang on a minute, is that something I wanted to do or should do? And why is that rewarding? That's really twisted. So having that as an overt thing in the text just made that really clear, and meant I didn't have to take away from the story to communicate those emotions.
And is it also a case of taking the reader through exactly just how exhausting it is for PETA, those things that are going on in her head, the way that she's constantly watching what she's saying. There's sort of these sub conversations that she's having with herself within her own head of, okay, we don't say things like that because it's not nice, so I need to say something supportive here or whatever it is. But did you also want to show just how exhausting that process is for someone who, in showing what is going on in someone's head?
I think for me, that's the inhale, exhale. And it appears sometimes, and it's that just keep breathing. And that exhaustion comes out in inhale, exhale, survive. We keep going. Survival is what we're about. And that's not a negative term for me. I should probably point out for me survival, and I won't go into it because it's a lot of my PhD, which gets very technical, but it's about that sense of living but living with whatever comes with that. So for me, those lines that come after the rating were about that exhaustion. But again, I didn't really think terribly hard when I did it, but that's a good thing. I think if you overthink sometimes it becomes a little technical or complicated, but the fact that it flowed out via PETA, sort of through her voice, that's what happened. And then I look back and go, oh, maybe it means that it wasn't a process of me thinking, how am I going to put this in? It just kind of came from her. And then I've looked back and thought, oh, yeah, you've just got to keep breathing. And that's the main thing.
Early on in the book, Jeb calls PETA Alphabet Girl. And I wanted to know about why you wanted to talk about the labels, why it was important for you to put this in, and the part where they talk about all of the labels that PETA has.
I wanted to be overt about them. I think they're so often hidden and shameful, and let's make a character who's like this but never say that, or don't speak the letters, because there's this sense of shame. And I just get sick of it, to be perfectly honest. I'm just like, well, do you know what? I know it's a little fraught. I get the system. I've thought pretty hard about this stuff, and I understand that labels are not always good. And I get that that it's not always a journey that is easy when you have one. But statistics show basically that if you are diagnosed, you're better off mental health wise. So it's really specific in terms of suicidal ideation and suicidal thoughts. If someone is diagnosed, the rates decline dramatically. And that's one of the only statistics that I've bothered with, to be honest, because I think that's really clear that we need to accept those labels and understand where they are and own them. And then we get to define them. And then we get to say, okay, you're going to give us these letters and you're going to define us in this way. So now we're going to own that and take that back and make it what we need it to be. And the book is about what happens after that. It's after the diagnosis. So you've given us these letters, and now what? You can't just say that's the end point. And there's no tablet to cure a lot of the labels that are there. So we need to find other ways for the community to understand and accept us. And I think accepting the labels is part of that, because people word around it. Like, oh, they dwell on the spectrum. Like, oh, okay, we'll just hang around on the spectrum. We don't need euphemisms. Just use the labels for what they are, and we understand they're fraught, but that's what we've been given. And some people are aiming to change some of the labels, but until they do, we'll make the most of what we've got. And PETA's very practical about that too, and pragmatic about it, I think. These are the letters. And I just needed that up front, and I needed to show the relationship between PETA and Jeb when it comes to those, because she shares them with him because he's safe, and you do need those safe people in your life. And they make a bit of fun at it because it's kind of what people do. It's like the in-jokes you can have, and Jeb is someone she can have an in-joke with.
Anna, this book is set with Jeb and Peter attending a TAFE college, and I wanted to know why you wanted that as a setting, particularly.
I'm so glad you asked. Nobody's really mentioned this a lot. But I went to a TAFE college. I went to Redland. Oh, actually, at the time it was called Bayside Community College. It doesn't exist anymore, so it's quite easy to put that in the book because there's no conflict because it disappeared. And I went to the TAFE for year 11 and 12. And we'd moved and life was a bit weird at the time. But actually my mum was the librarian, so it was a really weird circumstance for me to be at this TAFE. So, yeah. But it was just the perfect place for me. I was just dying in the state school. And literally, I believe by the time I got there, I was in such a state. So because you're so busy masking and it's so heavy in that really conformist atmosphere. And I went to the college and everyone was just all over the place because we really had people from all walks of life. I really had a big cat, although she didn't have a finger. And I couldn't put it in the book. It was a little bit too rough. But my real big cat, who she's sort of modelled on, actually had a bite bitten out of the back of her head from a fight she'd had. So the real version of Big Cat, it was more extreme than what I put in the novel, and even that felt risky. But we don't read these things. We don't read everyone's in a private school. Everyone's in the States. No, actually, I've only kind of read private schools. There's probably some state schools in there. And I wanted to show the options. And I had some amazing people at that college. And my English teacher, who I've made contact with, I don't know if I can say her name, but she has a copy of PETA LYRE, and she was just so, she was foundational in being one of the first people to really take me on and understand what was going on I was a bit of a nightmare. So she was great. So the TAFE was great. At the moment, it's a little different. They've put TAFE into high school. And so the TAFE only stream often is adult educated people. So people returning to education, which we had a lot of, but it's now a little bit more blended. But even the TAFE stream in high school receives a lot of discrimination. And I think if we can see what it's like from the inside, that might hopefully be changed.
I'm intrigued to know, now that you've mentioned Big Cat, you've mentioned some of the sort of similarities between your Big Cat in real life and Big Cat in the book who attends Peter's college. But is the similarity, I want to know, did your Big Cat, teach you a lot about history like Big Cat teaches Peter in this book?
I feel really naughty. I feel like it was like my big stealing moment from my actual life. And she wasn't called Big Cat, she was called Big something else. She was very tall, so she was really a presence for us, and she really had gone back to year 11 about 3 times in my memory, but obviously I was young. And I will never forget her sitting in that cafeteria saying those sorts of things to us, and that we really didn't know the difference between why Hitler wasn't a communist, because no one had really explained the basic things of how the world works and how politics works. And I used to do this with my students as first year teachers. I would teach them this basic stuff that she taught me, and they didn't know either. And they were about to vote, or could already. So 17 or 18. I spent a long time, when I was supposed to be teaching them something else, actually just teaching them some of those fundamentals that no one had bothered. And I think if my Big Cat hadn't done that, I still could have been really confused at an age when I shouldn't have been. And she had such world experience. She was living in a foster home full of people with stories that I couldn't write in, or it would have tipped over into new adult. So it's bizarre that it's kind of pegged as the swearing novel or the naughtier novel because it's really a tame version of what happened, and young adults are living this. I don't know why we should be too careful in their fiction, but yeah, my Big Cat.
And Peter meets Sam. What does Sam do to Peter's world?
she just fills it with passion and passion fruit, and she has this ability to take the rules and just understand them and then do what she wants with them. And for Peter, and even for me, I feel a bit nervous even talking about Sam, because she's still someone that I find hard to understand, because she does something I can't do, which is just get the system and work it. I'm like, oh my God. So I still have this weird reaction to her. So she fills Peter's world with questions, and questions that are really difficult to answer, but also just a really physical sense of, I want to know you, and that magnetic sense of, you're so dangerous and I can't help wanting to get close to the danger, because that's kind of what it's like, I think, when you're 16.
Well, Peter's a stickler for the rules, and that comes across just so often in even the conversations she's having with herself in her head, the conversations that she's having with others of telling them what to do. But she really kind of doesn't know how to take Sam in those first few interactions, because Sam just seems to not care about the rules, and Peter struggles with that a bit. You know, when you were writing that relationship between Peter and Sam, I mean, what did you want to explore with particularly their friendship and their relationship?
I just needed someone who would be, she had to be, and this is the way it was for me. So she is based on like this weird mashup of all my past girlfriends. So she was like this sensory experience that you just can't, I say you can't escape, in that, you know, it's more of a passive way, in that sort of when someone comes into your space, you can't ignore the effect they have on you, and you just enthralled by that. But also, I needed her to be there so that Peter had to push herself out of her comfort zones. And Sam's the reason she questions things on a really deep level, because Peter's biggest fear for me, and I hope this doesn't count as a spoiler, but her biggest fear, because it's my biggest fear, is hurting people. And I've heard, especially hurting people that you love. And so I'm afraid Sam comes in as someone, you know, who pushes all the buttons that I'm trying not to say anything wrong.
I don't think that was too much of a spoiler.
Well, she's a lot of the fun too. So she adds a lot of fun, because she's a really fun person, and Peter loves fun people. Jeb's really fun, and Peter adds that, but she's also really musical. And sorry, Sam adds that too. So she's also really musical, and Peter really loves that musicality. She listens to Mazaza, and I'm really guilty of the fact that Mazaza are friends of mine. And so my poor editor,
I had one when I read that.
My poor editor. I had lyrics in there, you see. I had a lot of lyrics in this whole section where they'd met before I'd known anything about publishing. And very quickly I was told, well, you can't put lyrics in
surprise.
from, whoops. And so then I went, okay, what if it was lyrics from people I know who'd agree? It's like, great, because it's the perfect people. And while they would have agreed, in the end we just avoided that. But yeah, a very, very good friend of mine is in Mazaza. But it worked really well with that Persian feel that they have to their music. So sorry.
That's the other thing that Sam brings to Peter's life, is this whole different other culture. So there are these different flavors that she's tasting when she goes to Sam's house, and these different drinks that she doesn't know what's in them.
The drinks are amazing. And I had an authenticity reader for Sam, who is a friend of ours, and we had the most hilarious experience where I had written certain things in the book that she was eating, but the words I'd used were slightly wrong. And then when we finally figured out what I meant, because English was a second and new language for Eshan, and then he went, oh, I know what you mean, I have that in my bag. So the lunch that she had, and he was like, yeah, I actually brought that today. But you have to add in that we would do this with it in terms of how the food was done. Anyway, it was fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And it was just so good to have that in there, because I just think that as when I was in college, one of my good friends was Chilean, and we used to have a lot of stuff going on around about that. But I thought Sam had to come from a Persian Australian family for some reason.
Well, let's move on to Jeb. Oh, I really want to talk about Jeb.
Everyone has just sighed. Everyone has just gone, oh.
I really enjoyed the character of Jeb, and I loved kind of getting to know their backstory, because there are parts in PETA LYRE&apos Rating Normal where the book goes back to parts of her past. So you kind of get filled in on the story. But I love the story of them meeting for the first time and how that all happened, and then sort of knowing that they've known each other for all of these years. I just thought that was such a beautiful story. But what is Jeb's story?
Jeb, I don't know. Jeb just kind of, I say this, that Jeb just arrived and he was just there. There's the concrete wall and they sit on that together, and there's Jeb. And he just is, he's part of the furniture for PETA and for me. And so he just was there. But the flashback chapters were probably some of the most painful to write in some ways. I didn't have them in there, and I didn't want to go into any of that. I'd completely avoided anything to do with the past. I wrote, there's one line that her parents quit, and I had that earlier. I had moved it a bit later in the end, because that was it for me. I was done. Parents quit. That's all I'm going to say. But I don't think that would have quite worked. And I had a really tight deadline, and I'd written 45,000 words in 2.5 weeks, and I still had to submit this. I still needed a 50,000 word at least for a young adult novel. And then I went to Adhd, and I've mentioned this before. I saw Claire Keegan speaking about pain. And I think it was that moment that I went back and wrote the flashbacks, and Jeb's story came out more. And I mean, I had his current situation, which is really not lovely. He's in quite a horrible situation, which is one that I saw a lot when I was a young person. But it's for me, I've told it in a way that it felt at the time. So it wasn't always elaborate. I know that sounds really weird. Sometimes it was just really boringly horrible. I don't know the words to describe it, because it sort of feels like it exists somewhere, and I'm trying to tap into that without getting too far drawn in, especially in PETA's story, getting too far drawn into Jeb, who may or may not appear in a companion novel, depending on what my editor thinks.
I just got excited by that, because one of the feelings that I had after reading this and putting it down was, I need more. I need to know what happens to Jeb. Where does Jeb go from here?
I know. Well,
he's a really good friend to PETA throughout this story. He he seems really laid back. Drives to Kingswood, picks her up, takes her places. They have this date, kind of, a best friends sort of, after
night.
Yeah,
down at Willow Point.
They have these things that they do, but he just seems like such a kind-hearted best friend who really understands PETA, because he's known her for so long, but also seems to be able to communicate that to Sam as well. And I think would you say that we see Jeb's character also grow on this ski trip too? So it's not only what's happening to PETA, but there are these instances where you get to kind of see what's happening with Jeb as well, and the way that he's relating to the people around him as well, and the bigger group of people that they interact with.
The ski trip is his opportunity to get away from this. It's a toxic masculinity situation that he's stuck in, and he's destined to be a mechanic. His family are mechanics, and I knew a lot of mechanics who I love dearly, but for Jeb it just wasn't what he wanted. And it wasn't just, he didn't mind the actual mechanicking, it was the culture that was around that as well. But going on the trip, without spoilers obviously, they do a lot of video work. He meets the film and television crew, and so he has a whole journey when it comes to choosing what he will do with his life and how much he'll stand up for himself, because he is easygoing people. He's laid back. He'll often let people direct him. And I think there's a moment, he needs to face that and what that would mean for the rest of his life if he continued the way he was going. And I think there are so many guys out there that just may not fit that hegemonic masculinity ideal who need a voice. And I needed that sense of masculinity in the novel, I feel. I don't know why. I just did.
And he's very, and you mentioned his brother Damo is very different to him as well, and is kind of the polar opposite in a way to Jeb. And Jeb's constantly dealing with that as well.
Yeah, and dealing with siblings. I mean, how much of your life is spent either looking up to and envying your siblings, or wishing you had some, or containing the disaster and the havoc that they wreak? I mean, I'm not, there's probably another option in there somewhere. But for me, it was kind of, and Damo again, there's a lot of people like Damo out there. He's horrible.
I wanted to go back to something that you talked about writing those flashbacks, and about how slightly traumatic that was for you to be able to tap back into parts of that and where Peter's story was going. And I thought it might be a good time to bring in some questions as well. And this girl on Twitter has asked, was the writing of the novel a therapeutic process?
Well, I guess very, very technically, not to take you literally, but I wrote the novel and then I was diagnosed as autistic. So I wrote the novel as Peter having ADHD, and I wasn't quite sure about the ASD side there. I wrote it as an ADHD own voices novel, but very quickly looked at it and thought, oh, crap, she sounds really autistic. I have autistic children, so I'm quite familiar with the traits of autism. And so then I went through a process of, do I live in the ASD, risking confusion over what own voices mean? Because if you write an own voices novel, do you mean you own everything the character has, or do you mean you own this much or this much? Where's the line? And I needed to know where the line was, and I wanted to know what the rules were, and there weren't many people telling me the rules at that time. So in the end, I submitted it, and I went through the assessment process and was diagnosed. So as being autistic, although, and for me, it was a real question. I had no idea. And yet the assessment came back as kind of unquestionably. And I went, oh, okay, wow. So then it was fully, in my mind, an own voices novel. So therapeutic in the fact for me that I have a much better understanding of myself. But more than that, I feel like I had a chance to hold teenage Anna's hand and say, you weren't as alone as you thought. No, you were. You wouldn't have been as alone if you had been a teenager now, hopefully, and you'd found a book and you'd found a community. You may have not felt quite as alone as you did. I'm not going to say anymore. I'm going to cry again.
Don't cry. Please don't cry. Naomi on YouTube, this is just a comment, has said, I'm up to the part where they have started the ski trip. I love the friendship and playfulness between Peter, Sam, and Jeb. And another question from Cal on Twitter was, how do you hope Peter Lyre's story helps young adults who have ADHD or ASD?
I hope it makes them feel less alone, and a little bit of pride and a little bit of ownership. And the letters aren't dirty. They just are what they are. And we get to then create our community in the best way that we can find each other. And sometimes, unfortunately, the letters are the way that we do that. So hopefully, just definitely a sense of knowing that if someone's written this and then someone published it and other people have bought it, you're clearly not alone. And then people who aren't neurodivergent just may have more understanding of you if they've read that. I know a very, very good friend of mine who's also been diagnosed since reading Peter Lyre. It's like the diagnosis novel. She's been giving the book to people to try and help them understand. And that's just the best thing. I love that.
Jenna asks, why and how did you write 45,000 words into?
Jenna? Okay. So ADHD being a hyperfocus issue and also a deadline thing. So fear is the best motivator, unfortunately. And I had booked an editor review session at the CYA conference, but I didn't have a manuscript. So I got all excited after the Love Your Day with Rhianna Patrick and thought, oh, maybe I could write young adult fiction because I hadn't written any by then. I thought, no, that's it. I'm never writing any. It would be all weird and too painful. And then I saw them all talking and I thought, oh, wow, this looks like I might be able to do that. So I booked, and I'd sat with Tina from the CYA conference, who was really friendly and lovely. So I booked the editor sessions, and then I had to generate myself a manuscript between then and when I submitted. And that fear, and also ignoring the house. My house is a complete tip, and I write really quickly. It just comes in short bursts, so it's like a hyper focus, but then it just comes out. And because I've got a lot of training in terms of typing and sentence structure and how things have to flow, because I have worked for 20 years in literature, so that probably helped. So I just wrote like fury, and it is a bit of a daze, which is why I sometimes find it hard to remember why I did something, because I didn't think very hard. But most good things happen when I don't think very hard. So yeah, that, and I just need to know what to write, and then it would come out quickly. But I think in the future it will be more complicated because I now know the whole process that could come after. Scary.
Carissa on YouTube says, oh my God, a companion novel. So someone is very excited about that. Keep your questions coming in. E. Henry says, if you could go back in time, what would you like to tell yourself as you started writing this?
I think that's a Liza. And I think I saw that one online and I went, oh my goodness. I think really practically speaking, I would say write down some dates that you did things, because people will ask you. And I have such a terrible memory and relationship with time that I've had to go and look at file creation dates to find out. I used to tell people it took me a month to write PETA LYRE because I didn't really know. I just knew the date of Love Ya and then the date of the CYA submission thing. And then I went and looked at the submission dates, and I renamed it because I kept retitling the book, and that's how I figured out how long it took. So that's not a really good idea. You should do the journaling, Kate Mildenhall's journaling, and I think it's Kate Mildenhall who does that. So I would say to myself, and I did that when I've written my second manuscripts, but the problem is I didn't write them in the same book. So then I wrote all the dates in all different places, and I actually haven't done anything. I'm really bad at talking to past me. I'd say stop. Oh my God. That's, I don't know. That's it. I'd say try not to be yourself, but you know you're going to be.
So Siobhan asks, what's the thing that surprised you the most, as in the most unexpected aspect of having your first novel published?
Oh my goodness. It's this emotional roller coaster. And I have received criticism my whole life for academic work. And I'm so prepared. An editor sends comments, right? It could be covered in red. I'm like, it's fine. It really doesn't bother me. Genuinely, like on the inside, doesn't bother me. But knowing people are reading the book and that they might not like it, and that someone might get upset that, I don't know, someone swore, or they might not understand who it's aimed at because the cover's blue. I don't know. I honestly, I can't. I've decided I can't look and so anything that's written about PETA LYRE, because I don't think I'm as strong as I thought I was. So I think that is it. I didn't realize how caught up I would feel in how she's doing. But then it's really extreme circumstances. So it's not like we're doing the normal things. So we're sort of all trying to do extra to help our books along because they're published during this virus business. And so it's a little bit like, did you do enough extra? So I feel like it's a bit weird there. I should stop gesturing. I told you not to gesture because it'll upset the video. Sorry. Oh, and I whacked the desk. Anna,
You did everything you said you didn't want to do. Jay has asked, why is it important that own voices and neurodiversity are across all forms of media, especially literature and fiction? And Jay says that he's asking as someone who grew up with zero representation.
Now, Jay has been like a rock for me. He's been such an amazing, they've been such an amazing supporter. And I just think that, Jay, you're the reason I want this book to get into the right people's hands. I think because we didn't see anything of ourselves, especially not a representation that would own the labels and acknowledge them. We see people on television and we all guess, and then the actors do interviews behind the stage where they say, oh yes, definitely, oh, Sheldon's definitely on the spectrum, so's Saga from The Bridge and all these other characters, but they don't talk about it, they don't say it on screen, because why? Like, what do they have to be ashamed of? And I just hope that in all forms of media, and PETA LYRE is being pitched to producers as we speak. I'm doing my best, everyone. We should have a series one day, so that there's a realistic, can I say that, authentic representation of what it's like to be neurodivergent and all the forms that can take. Because, oh my goodness, imagine they had more labels like being queer or not being middle class or all those things. So I just wanted to throw that all out there, and I agree with Jay that we need that in as many forms as we can find them. He asked why, didn't he? So that we don't feel
why is
alone.
it important?
So sorry, Jay. Because then we don't feel alone, and we'll try and address the stigma. But we need more than, we need more than PETA LYRE. I want hundreds. I want you to have so many people that you can then figure out which one you identify with. Can you imagine? And we're really lucky to have 2 Own Voices books with, even I get tripped up how to say stuff properly, but we have Please Don't Hug Me with Kay Kerr coming out at the same time, which is just amazing. Can you imagine having 2 books with Own Voices autistic authors and characters, and however we say it, at once, when we've not had that, before. So we just need more than that. You can't just have 2. Can you imagine if you just had 2 white middle class teenage guys and you had to choose one of them to identify with? No one would imagine. Sorry, I'll just ramble now. Cut me off, Rhianna.
No, it was all important. And, seeing yourself represented is always important. And you're right, is that the time is clearly now, because we have these 2 books coming out at the same time, very diverse in their story, but also giving an experience that maybe a lot of us, like me, haven't read before either. So, it's the diversity of the read as well that's coming into play there. Kay has asked, what has been your favorite part of your book being out in the world? Speaking of Please Don't Hug Me.
My favorite bit is the messages from people reading it. And I'm really sorry that it's normally because they're crying. That sounds really bad, that I should think that was good. But it means that they felt it. And I was saying to Carissa this afternoon, it means they've let it in, that they've joined PETA on that journey, whether they're neurodivergent or not. And, rather than read it sort of at arm's length, I sort of imagine some people reading it going, ooh, but to actually read it and let it affect you is, for me, that's the best thing. I didn't know how good that would feel. And another reader who had never read a book set in Brisbane or South Brisbane. So that was amazing to think there's this a 12-year-old, 13-year-old, was just, on the edge of where it's aimed, because it's a bit older than that maybe, but as an advanced reader, was just so stoked to see local places mentioned, down to the very suburb. And I thought, yeah.
It's why I've got the pineapple in the back. It's to represent the Queenslandness of it. AJ has a question. How do you balance drawing on your own experiences without letting them and I'll take that back. How do you balance drawing on your own experiences without letting them into the story as a separate entity. So I suppose, how do you draw on your own experiences in this without it becoming, like you say, big cat being not big cat?
Yeah, so that was my naughtiest one because it was so direct. But on the whole, I just imagined mostly the kernel of emotion, so what it was I felt at a certain time, and then I built a story around that. And while I had to use settings I knew for the technical side, in terms of when you drive out, do you go left or right, or you know, how long does it take to drive from one place to another? When it came to the relationships, I thought about the really powerful moments that I still remember to this day, in terms of whether it was pain or pleasure. And then I built the story around those. And so for me, even though they are close to me, those experiences, the way they happened is different. That's PETA's way. And it was her people that happened with. So I felt distanced from that. I feel very much like PETA is her own person. I've never really felt like she's me, even though we shared those emotions. But I don't know. I expect that's something all authors have, not just own voice writers. I think the own voice comes out in how it's written, for the thought processes. Yeah.
Megan on Instagram had asked, what would you like neurotypical readers to learn from PETA's experiences?
I don't know. I guess that's what it's like. Also, that if you have someone in your life who is neurodivergent and you thought to yourself, because people have said this to me, oh, you're probably not very autistic, are you? You're probably, or they must be really high functioning, which is the biggest foofy, because functioning comes down to where you are at that time. So you may be high functioning at one time in the day and then very low functioning at another time. And the experience of autism with level 3 needs is very different to autism with level 1 needs. There's probably a lot more than people realize goes on behind the scenes there. But if people could understand that, if you thought we seemed really normal, that was our gift to you, that we put ourselves through a lot of masking pain probably to make you feel comfortable, and we may have done that for years. And that doesn't, that sounds a bit aggressive, doesn't give you the right to question our diagnosis. I would suggest that nobody question a diagnosis, because they're actually not as easy to come by as you'd think. But yeah, I think that general sense of understanding would just probably go a long way. I wouldn't recommend you go around power hugging people. So I know Jeb gives the big deep pressure hugs with PETA, but as Kay's book points out, that doesn't mean you should just, like, if you see someone having a meltdown or an outburst, that you should just go and be like, oh, I know, I'll go and give them a big power hug. Please don't do that, because that could go horribly wrong. So, yeah, that was a bit of a tangent. I'm so sorry.
It wasn't, but I think that's important, because you should always ask anyway before you hug someone.
Yeah, it's just really, if you have to ask, you probably don't know them well enough.
SL Ross on Instagram asks, why the skiing trip?
Sarah, the skiing trip would be because I went on one and I'm a bit of a cheat. And so I thought I needed a plot, and I'm really not very good at plot. I just want to be in their heads and in their sensory world forever. But in books, actually, it's much more interesting if they go somewhere or do something. So I was like, oh, I know, I'll go on the ski trip. Now, my ski trip, I had to go on with an ex-boyfriend who sat next to me, and it was there were a lot of reasons why it was very different. Some things that happened on the ski trip are based on real experiences, but we're not giving spoilers. And also, and also our coach did have a leak in its tube. And I can't say more than that, but if you've read it, you'll be like, oh. So we did have a lot of fact checking.
As in
on
the bus, not a person. As in a bus. I just want to clear that up. Belinda on YouTube has a question. Anna, what stories do you want to write into the future?
Well, I have And the reason I get a bit funny about this companion novel thing is that I did write it in a way that we could take it out of the same setting in case it looked like too much to have the same setting as Peter Lyre, but in year 12, at the end of year 12, with two different characters and following them through their journey. So there's that manuscript is done, and there's also one with that's completely different. That's sort of a mystery and looks at panic attacks with a slightly magical realist feel. And into the future, I love fantasy writing, and I'm just really bad at it, so I have to do a lot of practice. I'll write anything, basically, and I'll just keep going. And if it's like throwing darts, I will just throw loads of darts until like my editor screams, and that means I've hit. So yay! Sorry, Jodie and Kate, but yeah, I'll just keep writing, and if anyone wants to read it, that's great.
And I think this will be a final question. Ghost Cryptid on Instagram asks any writing advice for aspiring authors, and what books were your biggest inspirations for this one?
Oh, I love this. Well, writing advice I'm normally extremely bad at, so I'm going to give you what I wish I'd said on a recent podcast, which is to write for the joy of it. You do need to write what you need to write, and someone will either read that and love that or not. You still had to write it. The point was you had to get that out. So as long as you get it out, and then if that doesn't hit its target, and doesn't go anywhere else, then you write the next thing and you keep writing, because that's the process that we love to do. And if you don't get any joy out of that, even if you hate it sometimes, second book hell, you still have to have that bit of joy there. So apart from all my talk about pain, I will now talk about the joy, and that's what you need to remember is important. And the books that inspired me, this is me saying don't move a lot on screen. So full of it. I have a few here. One of my favorites is Suppression by Jeanette Winterson. But it's a weird one to not recommend, but say, because I love half of it and not the other half. So I don't really love Henry, because he's just a bit of an ass. But I really love it's completely highlight. Oh, bits have fallen out. That's probably 20 years old. That was my first, probably my first queer representation, potentially. That just was like, and then I have a lot of copies of Frankenstein behind me.
Which doesn't at all feature in this book. That's a spoiler.
Yeah, I have a lot of really normal versions, but then I also have this one from my friend Linda Knight, who gave me, which is this really weird steampunk version. It's illustrated, and it's really beautiful. I haven't actually read Frankenstein in this format, but I just really like having it because it's really, really freaky and kind of illustrative. This will mess up my white balance completely. Anyway, it's a really freaky book, but I loved this, and I really wanted Peter Lyre to have a heart made of a lyrebird's tail that was stitched through the middle and being pulled apart as a necklace or on the cover. I have a Pinterest board, and that was the kind of stuff I had in mind. But we got this beautiful thing, which is much better. I overthought it, let's say, a lot. And the other one I really love is The Moonlight on the Avenue of Faith, which is magical realist, and is from an Iranian American writer who I have just realised may have had something to do with Sam's character. There we go. I hadn't thought that through before. Love that one. And lots of books. I love lots of books, and I will stop because I will go on forever.
Well, the fun doesn't stop here, does it, Anna? Because you can head over to the Oz Authors online website for the Green Room chat, which is where Anna will be. And so if you have any questions that we haven't got to, or you've got questions that you've been holding on to ask Anna yourself, then there's going to be a link that comes up in the chat box that will take you over there. But we have to draw some prizes, Anna. So I'm drawing the signed Peter Lyre's Rating Normal with a special bookmark, which is very pretty. I've got the hat.
Little ones
this
and
is the
big
hat.
ones.
It's a pirate's hat.
I haven't
Anna.
signed it.
That's
This is
the
my
hat
favourite.
that I have. Hang on. Let me just. I feel like I need some music. I'm going to pull out a winner. Okay. Look, it's all official. And the winner is CJ.
Carissa. You can have it.
CJ.
I'm going to send you I'm going to cry. I'm going to send you so much stuff.
And
be like, oh, sorry.
Anna, are you drawing the fantabulous toilet paper? And was it first draft page?
So it's a copy of that page. So with original titles. Originally, every chapter had a title. Oh, I could send the list of titles too. Every single chapter had a title that was a quote from Frankenstein. It was 2 or 3 words from Frankenstein, every single chapter, apart from one that was forever, like just nothing, because I couldn't think of one. And that was my biggest worry submitting the manuscript was, oh no, I didn't think of a title for that chapter. Little did I know they were just going to go, oh no, we won't use those anyway. Weeks. So all my pre-order people who I love very, very much.
I like that you're keeping with the theme of the ski trip.
Did you like that?
Beanie. Yep, I noticed
Again,
that.
it's all my daughter's stuff. Mine is not very pretty. It's very practical, but her stuff's really pretty. So I have chosen that instead. And we have got, I pulled out the label, like from inside the beanie.
Oh, right. That's helpful. And the winner is
so
made
sorry,
in Australia.
Very professional. We are very professional. Kate Littlejohn. Oh, now you're going to see how professional we are on my piece of paper. So Kate Littlejohn, if you would like to send me a message, or I will try and find you, because I know a lot of Kates, so I'm wondering which one was Kate Littlejohn. I think I know who that might be. Send me a message or I will find you, because I have your address, so I will totally find you. And I will just add into your bookmark pack all sorts of other stuff as well. Thank you so much.
And don't forget that if you haven't yet got Anna Whateley's PETA Lyre Rating Normal, then you can pick it up at any regular bookstore. Bookshop, bookstore, wasn't sure what's going with there. Or you can head over to the Oz Authors online website, and there's a bunch of links over there as well where you can find it. Anna, it has been an absolute pleasure chatting to you about everything to do with PETA Lyre Rating Normal. Congratulations on your debut book. And don't forget that you can find Anna over at the Green Room at the Oz Authors online website, and she'll be popping over there soon, and follow the link through. But thank you so much for joining Anna and I, and have a great night.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rhianna. Thank you, Way. Thanks, everyone. Come in the Green Room. And I don't know when we will actually go offline. So, we can chicken dance until it actually goes off. Are you there, Way? Oh!